Hello, everyone, and welcome to an episode of the Civil War Regiments podcast. I want to begin by wishing everyone a happy 4th of July and a happy summer. I'm technically on my summer break from podcasting right now, but it's Gettysburg week, and I think every history buff always feels obliged to do something about it. And so I'm a big Gettysburg buff, and I'm also a huge enthusiast of the Army of the Potomac, as well as regiments, order of battle, you name it, as most of you know by this point, if you've been listening to this show for a long time. But I had to address something, right? And I thought this might be a fun opportunity to kind of recap the book series that I've released. It's been about a year now since it's been finished. I did the 9-part Order of Battle series for the Army of the Potomac at Gettysburg. And I thought it'd be a fun to kind of recap that project, talk about the inspirations behind it, and what I hope for it to accomplish, and also what I hope to do down the road in relation to that. And then also give you a little preview of each volume and the kind of content you can expect in each one. And so I'm going to highlight a particular regiment from each volume. This is the Civil Regiments podcast, and so I thought, what better way to highlight some regiments of Gettysburg than feature that from each of my volumes. Before I dive into all that, if you aren't familiar with them or if you haven't heard, it's called Order of Battle, Army of the Potomac at Gettysburg, 9-volume series. They're all available through lulu.com, Lulu Publishing. I'll have all the links in the description and whatnot for this episode. Each copy is roughly averages out to 300 pages, and they're all softcover paperback books, and they really are an in-depth look into the Order of Battle. I know the question I keep getting over and over again is, when is the Army of Northern Virginia series going to come out? And I really do hope that that does happen one day. I'm in early phases of that right now. It's a long, hard project, and it's more difficult than I feel like there's a lot more research out there for the Union regiments and the Union armies than there is for the Confederate counterparts. It takes a little more time, a little more. You have to dig deeper for it. And I'm in early phases. I have no timeline. I had a lot more time on my hands when I did the Army of the Potomac series, and so I really pushed myself in a 2 to 3 year time span to really make that happen. And so I expect it might be longer this go around, but I hope to see that. It makes me happy that I at least finished the Army of the Potomac series, and I hope that I can do the A and V. But if something happens and I can't do it or can't do it in my lifetime, I hope that someone else can down the road. But I'm going to make it my goal to try to accomplish that. With that being said, I've also heard many comments that it'd be cool to do other campaigns, beyond Gettysburg, detailed order of battles for Chickamauga, for instance, Vicksburg, Atlanta, all these other huge campaigns that need attention. And I think there's a market for the people that like to deep dive into order of battles and regimental history. So with the success of my Army of Potomac series, I really do think that other volumes down the road would be well worth it. And so, but I'm I have a day job. I have a lot of I have my podcast. I have a lot of obligations. So having the time to do all this can be very difficult. But I have to try to make time for it, because I have to give the people what they want sometimes. And so bear with me for that. Anyway, with that being said, too, I hope that this fall, to continue episodes of Civil Regiments podcast, I have a great lineup of guests. I'm finalizing right now, and so the next half of this season in 2024 should be packed full of a lot of fascinating episodes. I look forward to sharing more content there. But again, I'm interrupting my summer vacation to, talk a bit about Gettysburg. So I tend to do that every year. I think last year I did a little conversation with my brother where we could just talk Gettysburg for an hour and just chit chat about our favorite memories and things about that. So you can go back in the archives to find last year's tribute episode. my brother couldn't join me today, so I'm just doing this a loner tonight. But again, I just wanted to talk about my project and how it began and what it is. And so, um, really, my interest in order battle Gettysburg has been since I was a kid. I first saw the movie Gettysburg so long ago. I didn't see it when it first came out. I saw I think we rented it the first time I ever saw it, but fell in love with it immediately, and I fell in love with the 20th Maine. In my early days of history, all I could think about and pursue. I read the 20th Maine Regimental History by John Pullen. That was like one of the first books I dove into, and so I, did a lot there. But then my interest in the 20 Maine soon it helped me understand that I want to hear about other regiments, and when I would go to Gettysburg, I wanted to take pictures of all the monuments and I wanted to check all of them out. And after a while, I was like, okay, I want to start learning about all these other units at Gettysburg. And then I remember the first books I started buying that had orders of battles in the back. And that kind of opened my eyes to how big an army could be. Because sometimes, you can read a battle narrative and you don't see the condensed, list of every regiment and every brigade that's involved in a campaign. And so when I stumbled upon Orders of Battle, I was like, I'm a big organization fan too. And so just seeing how armies were organized and formed really attracted me. And so I remember being fascinated with corps badges and whatnot. And when I would take family and friends to Gettysburg, I would take them on more of a regimental deep dive, show them around Gettysburg on my own like that. And so I remember a couple years back, I took my brother and a group of friends up to Gettysburg, and I remember my brother and a few others were like, "You should do something with all the knowledge you've accumulated and your passion for regiments. You should just do something like that." And so I got the idea to finally, um, I wanted to do a project that I really liked, but also something that I thought others would enjoy as well. And so this project was a project for me, is how it started. But of course, once you publish it and share it, and all of a sudden you find out, oh, other people want this too. And so I think a lot of projects start that way. But I was so excited just for me personally to accumulate all this research and have everything all in one place. Trying to plug up my laptop there. So over the years, I've seen so many books out there. There's a lot of order battle studies out there, but I noticed that a lot of them didn't have everything all in one place. Like, for instance, there's books out there that have just the numbers, right? The engaged, the casualty counts, they have all of that all in one book. Then there's some that have the names of all the regimental commanders and brigade commanders, or the structure of who was in command at the beginning of the battle and who was in command at the end of the battle. So some had that added in there, and then other ones, had a little biographies of the commanders, and other ones had pictures of monuments for each regiment. But what I found was, like, if you're like me, and I own like a whole library of Gettysburg books just in the other room here, but I would find myself juggling the stack of books anytime I was researching something. Anytime I'm driving around the battlefield, I have just a pile of books in the back seat. There's a lot of handbook guides, right? But all of them have their own specialty and different thing. And so I wanted something all in one place. And I know I have a 9-volume series, right? So that's a lot. But I wanted to make an individual volume for each corps at Gettysburg. And so depending on what you want to study, so like for me, if I'm a big buff of the 11th Army Corps, and so I want to accumulate everything I have in one place for the 11th Army Corps. And so if I drive around Gettysburg, or if I want to walk the trails, or if I want to walk all the monuments to the 11th Corps, I have this book guide with me to the 11th Corps to give me enough information, because even the monuments have inscriptions on the monuments, and you can get some of the commanders' names and the names of the dead off of a monument, or the casualty totals off of a monument. So, I mean, there's a limited amount of information. But what I wanted to do essentially was make an order battle guide, and the most jam packed order battle that you can find, where not only do I have the name of the regiment and all that. I have where applicable their nickname. I have their commander's name and who commanded at the end of battle. I have the killed, wounded, missing counts. I have the number of engaged count. I have the muster in, muster out dates of the regiment. I have information on the monument and when a monument was dedicated. I have a picture of the monument when available, and then I also have a picture of a member of that unit where available. And then on top of all of that, I also have 2 or 3 firsthand accounts of that unit and that regiment. And I wanted that because if you're standing there by the monument, you could just flip to the page for that regiment and you could be like, well, what did these guys do here? And you could just flip the page and read some firsthand accounts of the men in that unit right then and there. The condensed versions, right? I don't have the full regimental histories in these books, but I would found excerpts worthy of note, and then at the end of each unit section, the list of the killed and the killed and mortally wounded. So the death toll of each unit at the end. So that's what I have, like a profile for each regiment. So I want to give you a little bit of everything all in one place. And that's what I appreciated. And that's what I hope anyone that has a copy of these books appreciates too. Have that information in one place. And so again, it's by me for people like me. Right. And so if anything, I'm happy with how the series turned out. My family, my friends are happy about what turned out. So at the end of the day, that's what matters. But I think, with the success of it, a lot of people have shown interest in it. And so now I have to get my act together and make some more. So pray for me that I can pursue this and keep going with it, because I really do want to keep pursuing this. I'm a writer, in my spare time too, so I like to write fiction. I also like to write articles and things. And so again, limited on time. And this series is more, I'm not writing about Gettysburg. I'm using the words of the men who fought the Battle of Gettysburg. So that's my goal. I'm letting the soldiers tell the story and the facts tell the story. So it's really a fact book more than it is something written by me. And so I'm also a writer. So this is also something that I'm not showcasing my own talents per se. I'm showing my maybe compiling research talents, but not my writing talents. And so I really hope to get back into more writing as well. So I say that just, I'm trying to give myself excuses, I guess. Anyhow, I thought I would dive in to some of these volumes. And just give you an idea of what each one is about. And again, what I hope to accomplish with this. Again, you can purchase all these through lulu.com. I'll have the links in the description. And also, if you're watching the video feed here, I'm going to show you a little bit too. I can only show you the covers and excerpts from it on camera. And if you already own some of the books, I'll shout out the page number and you can follow along with what I'm reading and talking about. And so, with that being said, without further ado, maybe I'll just dive into this and show you all. But again, this orders of battle I just find fascinating, and just wanted to have everything all in one place. And so here we go. So I'm going to show you right now, Volume 1. Volume 1 is Order of Battle Gettysburg, the Army of the Potomac, Headquarters and Artillery Reserve. So this is Volume 1. Now, I said earlier, each volume features a corps. So that is the case, except for Volume 1. What I want to do with Volume 1 is the headquarters of the Army of Potomac is so vast. You have the Provost Guard, you have the Headquarters Guard. You also have militia units involved in the Gettysburg campaign. And there's also the Artillery Reserve, which is kind of its own thing. And so I thought, okay, why not put all the miscellaneous groups in one volume? So I have the headquarters, the Artillery Reserve, and the militia all in this volume. And so that's the difference. All the other volumes represent the various corps. And so there's, again, a reminder, there's 7 infantry corps at Gettysburg in the Army of the Potomac and 1 cavalry corps. So that's 8 corps, technically, with an artillery reserve and then with the headquarters of the Army of the Potomac. So anyway, without further ado, here it is, the cover again. And my sister, Lucy, is the one who actually designed the covers of each volume. And about half the volumes, the colorizations that you see were done by a friend of mine, Luke Young, who does colorized images. And so he colorized the commander image and some of the colorizations there on the front cover. Halfway through the series, my sister took over some of that. So half the colorizations were done by my sister too later on in the series. We'll get to that too. But shout out to my sister Lucy, my friend Luke, for their work there. But they really did a great job making the covers beautiful. I really appreciate it. I really want it to look like something that I would want to buy. And so when I see it, like if I saw this on the shelf, I would grab it because I want it to look appealing to myself. And so the idea I had was I wanted to highlight the overall commander of the Corps, in this case, the headquarters book. The overall central figure is George Meade, commanding the Army of the Potomac, and then flanked on both sides, black and white images of some of the subordinates. And then on the bottom, I would feature a different painting or image here. In fact, in this one, this is the 8th U.S. Infantry in camp. I think this is in June, right before the Battle of Gettysburg. I think it's a pretty famous image of the 8th U.S., and my friend Luke colorized that. And that's just a beautiful touch there at the bottom. But to tell you, those of you watching might already recognize some of these gentlemen. But again, the central figure is Meade, and he's flanked by Dan Butterfield, chief of staff there, who held on to that position after serving under Hooker. So they had to work together, Dan Butterfield. Beside Butterfield is Governor Andrew Curtin from the state of Pennsylvania. I feature him prominently in the book because I'm also featuring the Pennsylvania militias he called them together. I also have General Henry Hunt, who was the chief of artillery of the Army of Potomac. And then next to him is General Robert Tyler, who was in command of the Artillery Reserve. So those are the figures you see on the front cover here. On the back cover, I have a cool colorization again by Luke of Meade and his staff directly after Gettysburg. And you see quite a few figures there. You have Andrew Humphreys and William French of the Third Corps. You have Warren from the Fifth Corps. Ikes is over there on the side from the Fifth Corps. And then you have Henry Hunt standing there by the tent pole. And for the heck of it here, I'm going to read the description of Volume 1 on the back cover here. Volume 1, Headquarters and Artillery Reserve, offers an in-depth look at Major General George Meade and each member of his command staff in the campaign, as well as details on the Provost Guard, engineers, and Pennsylvania militia. This volume also covers the Artillery Reserve, an organization full of young artillerists who would prove themselves valiantly and inflict great damage on the Army of Northern Virginia over the course of the battle. So that's the overall description there. To give you a little idea, I'll do it for this one for Volume 1. There's a lot of similarities in each volume, obviously. The covers look very similar. But besides the table of contents, I have the same introduction in each volume, which is a lot of what I just shared with you all a few minutes ago, and just my early inspirations as a kid all the way up until today of what inspires me about Gettysburg and learning about the regiments at Gettysburg and how each regiment deserves their fair attention. Because one thing that, just like I got into the 20th Maine by the movie and everything, there's so many stories out there that are worth sharing and hearing about and telling. And so what I hope to accomplish from this series too is that you'll read through these volumes, or you'll stumble upon an account that you've never heard of before, or you'll find out that a random regiment or a random little monument that you drive by all the time you go to Gettysburg, there's a bigger story that you didn't even know about, or other bayonet charges, or other desperate stands that you're like, why isn't there a movie about these guys? Or why isn't there a book about these guys? And so I hope that springs from this as well. And I hope also that when you read an excerpt, when I share an excerpt from an account or a regimental history, that inspires you to read the rest of the regimental history, dig deeper into it, whether it's a Connecticut regiment or a Vermont regiment or a New York regiment. They're like, wow, I never heard these guys before. I wanted to learn more of what they did before and after Gettysburg. Another thing I do in this series is I showcase reserve units, units that weren't engaged, but they were there. Whether they were guarding trains or a few miles away or assigned to the Army right after Gettysburg. I have accounts from some of those regiments because they still tell stories that are worth hearing. For instance, some units that weren't engaged, they have compelling stories marching to Gettysburg. or of pursuing Lee right after Gettysburg. And so, or trying to survive off the land, or encounters with civilians in Pennsylvania. I stumbled upon many interesting, intriguing accounts just from that. It's like, okay, these guys didn't fire a shot at Gettysburg, but they have one of the most epic march stories I've heard. So there was a lot of that I found as well, especially within the Sixth Corps, And so I have a whole volume like this for the Sixth Corps that hardly did much fighting at Gettysburg, but their men wrote many wonderful eyewitness accounts regarding that. And that goes also, disclaimer too, that I understand that especially some of these regimental histories, news articles and things, they get written out, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, many, many, many years after the war. A lot of this information can be inaccurate at times, and also, in patriotic moods, or in, some guys would milk what they did at Gettysburg, or blow it out of proportion. There's a lot of that, a lot of chest thumping, a lot of pride, of course. Everybody believes that their regiment did the best job at Gettysburg, and so, but there's plenty of narratives out there where you can get the fuller story. And again, what I wanted to do was let the soldiers tell the story. So whether it's an 80-year-old veteran trying to recall his memories of Gettysburg, it's still a survivor of Gettysburg writing the story. And so I wanted to share the actual words of the soldiers. And so because they still have a better eyewitness than others. And so that's my takeaway from that. That's why I wanted to share. So anyway, with all that being said, I'll go back diving into volume one. Again, so I have the introduction in each book. And what I did before, at the beginning of each volume, I have introductory articles where I found some of these general biographies and some of these memoirs and firsthand accounts. I found some fascinating articles. Like I found one by General Doubleday, just kind of setting the stage for the Gettysburg invasion. I found an article about the history of Corps badges by Dan Butterfield, turning points of the campaign, description of the battlefield of Gettysburg by a soldier, an artilleryman. So I wanted to provide some kind of articles to set the scene for Gettysburg. Also, the Monuments to Pennsylvania book, Pennsylvania at Gettysburg, has a lot of wonderful information in those volumes. And one of the fascinating things in there is the full itinerary of the Army of the Potomac. And they have individual itineraries for each corps in there. And so I shared that. I also have the itinerary of the Army of the Potomac here in the beginning of the book. And so that's kind of interesting, added feature there. And what you'll find in each volume too is I have a profile on the commander of the corps, profiles in each commander. So whether it's the corps commander, a brigade commander, division commanders, and then I have profiles on each individual regiment, each individual artillery battery, and each individual reserve unit that's known from each corps. And so, again, volume one covers, all the staff officers of the Army of the Potomac, and then all the different headquarter units, provost units, engineer units. I selected a few of the militia units, not all of them, because there's too many. But also, when it comes to the Pennsylvania militia, there was honestly a lot that nothing is written about, or a lot that never fired a shot, And so what I did was I accumulated the most known ones, like the 26th Pennsylvania Emergency Regiment, or the Lincoln Cavalry, or the Philadelphia City Troop, like some of the ones, the 21st PA Cavalry. Some of the ones are a little more known for various reasons. So I have all of them included here. But to give you one excerpt from this, I decided to highlight Battery G of the 1st New York, and it's in the back of the book here. And so this gives you an idea of one profile for one unit. So they were in the Artillery Reserve. They were actually in the 4th Volunteer Brigade. And so that's the 1st New York Light Artillery, Battery G. You can see the format there. I have the title of the unit, the monument, picture of the commander, the stats for that unit, and then the first-hand account. And so that's what you can expect here. And so I'm going to read this now. This unit was mustered in Elmira, New York, September 22nd, 1861, and mustered out June 19th, 1865. At Gettysburg, it was under the command of Captain Nelson Ames. They were armed with 6 Napoleons. Their strength was 84 men. Their casualties totaled 7. They had 0 killed. They had 7 wounded and 0 captured or missing, and the percentage loss was 8.3%. Their monument was dedicated in 1893. And I have several accounts here, and I'm just going to read one. This account is by Captain Nelson Ames in his History of Battery G, published in 1900. This is a fascinating account here. A little incident occurred during the thickest of the fighting just described that will give the reader a notion of the spirit that animated the men of this battery. A shell from one of the guns of the enemy exploded and cut John Krause's foot off, just at the ankle. He was serving as number 1 on his gun and had just stepped in to load as a flying shell burst. Number 2 had also stepped in to put a charge in the gun. When his companion saw that Krause's foot had been shot off, he stepped back as if he would wait until another man could take the place of the wounded. Krause called out to him as follows: "Damn you, what are you waiting for? Put your charge in. I'm going to have one more shot at them, leg or no leg." And it is worthy of record that he loaded the gun while he was standing on the stump of that foot. Captain Ames passed from one flank of the battery to the other just at this time and said to Krause, "Well, John, have they wounded you at last?" "Yes," replied Krause. "The damn fools have shot my foot off. That was the best they could do." The captain asked him if he would like to have a swallow of whiskey. There was a big smile on Krause's face as he replied to the question and said, "I don't think I ever saw a time in my life when it would be more acceptable." The captain reached down, took out a flask, which he always carried in his saddlebags when going into action. It was carried to help men who might be wounded. As he handed it to Krause, he said, "Take a good drink. That will brace you up." But as he watched him adjust the flask to his mouth and keep it there, he felt very thankful that the flask itself was not swallowed. This man Krause was placed on a stretcher and sent to the field hospital where his leg was amputated. It did not heal and had to be amputated again. It never did heal thoroughly. It goes almost without saying that with such men to serve in battle, defeat was impossible. Men may be obliged to fall back, but when they do such service as John Krause did, falling back is no dishonor. Again, that's from Captain Nelson Ames of Battery G. So that gives you an idea there, an excerpt of an account from one unit in the Artillery Reserve. So that's Volume 1. Now, moving on, Volume 2. Volume 2 showcases the 1st Army Corps. So don't be confused by the numbers. I know, it makes sense when you get to Volume 5 and it's the 5th Corps. But Volume 2 is the 1st Army Corps, is how it lined up. So once again, you have a colorized front cover here. The central figure is Major General John Reynolds, commanding the 1st Corps. And he's flanked by General Wadsworth, who's flanked by General Stannard. And on the other side is General Robinson and General Doubleday. And on the bottom there is part of that famous Sakurama image, and what looks like reserves from the 1st Corps actually running to assist during Pickett's charge, which a lot of the 1st Corps units did at the time of the battles. Interesting touch there. On the back cover, I have a colorized image of the Pennsylvania Bucktails. That's the 149th Pennsylvania. Colorized image, again by Luke Young. And also, I'll go ahead and read the description on the back cover here. Volume 2, the 1st Army Corps, offers an in-depth look at Major General John Reynolds and each regiment of the battle-hardened Corps. With legendary brigades and regiments, the 1st Corps was the first Federal infantry unit to be engaged at Gettysburg. The unfortunate and sudden death of Reynolds caused shock among all involved in the battle, but yet the 1st Corps put up a memorable fight, from the Iron Brigade battling it out against Pettigrew's Tar Heels to action at the railroad cut and Seminary Ridge, and the Vermont Brigade's great success in the flanking of Pickett's charge. This regiment was in Cutler's Brigade of the 1st Division of the 1st Corps, and it's actually the 147th New York Infantry. They deserve, as everybody does in this Corps, deserves a lot of attention. The 1st Corps was honestly decimated on the first day, and they didn't function much as a corps not long after the Battle of Gettysburg. They were consolidated into the 5th Army Corps early in 1864. The 1st Corps, they suffered about 50% casualties. They went into battle with 12,000 men, suffered losses of 6,000. So the total decimation in the 1st Army Corps. And you get a good example of that in the 147th New York. So here you have their profile here. I have a picture of their monument, picture of a soldier of that regiment. And now I'll read the stats here in this account. They were mustered in Oswego, New York, September 22nd, 1862. They were mustered out on June 7th, 1865. They were commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Francis Charles Miller, who was wounded in action. The command at the end of the battle was Major George Harney. They were armed with Enfield rifles. Their strength was 380 men. The casualties were 296. They had 60 killed, 44 wounded, and 92 missing and captured, for a percentage loss of 77.9. Their monument was dedicated in 1888. Again, a pretty insane ordeal for the 147th. And they have a very intriguing story where, they're holding the ground right there when they get into position on the first day, and they never got orders to fall back or retreat. In fact, the courier that was coming to tell them to fall back got shot in the throat. Their commanding officer gets wounded, and so there's confusion within the ranks, but their orders were to hold the ground, and so they held much longer than a lot of regiments on their left and right, and so that's what caused the increase in casualties there. They got overwhelmed quickly, and so they had a horrible time trying to get off the field. So very few men actually made it out. And so I want to share one account. Again, there's several accounts here, but this is from Major James Coey. I'm probably butchering a lot of the names, I know, but it might be Coey. I think it's Major James Coey, 147th New York, and this is from a National Tribune article in July 1915. And he talks of those final crazy moments of the 147th. There was no question of surrender in the minds of the officers. The prison pens of the South, even at that day, were more to be dreaded than the foe in the field. At this juncture, a mounted officer was seen circling in our rear, waving his hat and beckoning for us to retire. It would have been certain death for him to enter that maelstrom of fire, mounted as he was. Major Harney then gave orders to be communicated along the line for the men to divest themselves of everything but the rifle and cartridge box. Thus went our rations, and until July 4th, only 2 crackers from a passing regiment sustained us. Upon the order to retreat, the men were to fire, rise up, and immediately fall down, thus letting the enemy's fire pass over them. Then, bending low, march in quick step to the rear, trailing their guns, loading and firing at will. The guide to the center and the color bearer were instructed to align on some trees, quite a distance in our rear, but clearly to be seen. Our loss up to this time of falling back had been heavy in mortality, but not in wounded, owing to the configuration of the ground. The ridge under which we were lying was sharp and broke abruptly to the rear, answering in a measure as a shallow rifle pit. Upon the order to march, the line delivered a volley. The scourge of lead that passed over was terrible and could almost be felt, not the zip of bullets, but a rushing, forcing sound. Then the line rose again, and to us, the officers in the rear, it seemed to melt away as it received the retained fire of the enemy's line, by this time in a full line of battle, the skirmishers having merged with it. As stated, 126 fell there on that line, and mostly by that fire. Many of the enemy, in their excitement and haste to capture us, failed to draw their ramrods after loading their guns, shooting them at us, and only those who have heard the sound can realize the demoralizing effect they produce. The enemy was now so near, even their camp hatchets were hurled among us, with vile and opprobrious taunts, as bitter as their fire, calling on us to surrender. Our men were fast falling, and it seemed, after all our efforts and great loss, that we would have to surrender at last. But the major commanding encouraged the men by his coolness, word, and example, freely exposing himself to hold out. His action on that field and during the greater part of the war endeared him in the hearts of the whole command. So, wow, that's a crazy account of the retreat from the field of the 147th and the few survivors of it. So, pretty chaotic moment there within their ranks on the first day. There's one profile from Volume 2. Moving on now to Volume 3. So, Volume 3 is on the 2nd Army Corps at Gettysburg. Again, here I'll show you the central colorized figure is a commanding officer, General Winfield Scott Hancock. And beside him, I have General John Gibbon, General John Caldwell, and on the other side, General Alexander Hayes and General Alexander Webb. Those are the central figures I wanted to highlight on the front cover there. On the bottom there, you have a famous image showing Hancock holding the line there on Cemetery Ridge during Pickett's charge. On the back cover here, so this is interesting. This is actually a painting by my own brother, Joseph. He wanted to do a painting recreating General Zook and Zook's brigade in the wheat field at Gettysburg. So General Zook here is seen mounted on the horse, holding his sword, moments before he would probably receive his mortal wound. So those are elements of Zook's brigade advancing through the wheat field. So that's an original by my brother that I wanted to showcase there. I'll read the description here off the back. Volume 3, the Second Army Corps offers an in-depth look at Major General Winfield Scott Hancock and his Cloverleafs. Each regiment and commander of the legendary Corps at Gettysburg is featured, including the famed Irish Brigade, the Philadelphia Brigade, and the Harper's Ferry Cowards. The Second Corps and its leadership would shine through all of the pivotal moments in the Great Battle of Gettysburg. So, with that, I want to showcase one regiment from the Second Corps, and I selected the 27th Connecticut Infantry. This is on page 97 here. So here we have a profile of the 27th Connecticut. I have their commander and monument pictured here for their profile. So this was a very small regiment at the Battle of Gettysburg, but still worth noting. They were mustered in New Haven, Connecticut in October 1862. They were mustered out July 27th, 1863, just a few days after the battle. They were commanded at Gettysburg by Lieutenant Colonel Henry Merwin, who was killed. The command at the end of the battle was Major James Coburn. They were armed with 58 caliber and Austrian 54 caliber muskets. Their strength at Gettysburg was 75 men. Their casualties were 37. They had 10 killed, 23 wounded, and 4 captured and missing, for a percentage loss of 49.3. Their monument was dedicated in 1885. And so I wanted to share a couple of accounts here about the 27th at Gettysburg. One is the dying words of Colonel Henry Merwin. His last documented words are, "My poor regiment is suffering fearfully." And that's from the Regimental History by Winthrop Sheldon, the 27th for Regimental History, published in 1866. Also, a side note, there is a little marker for the spot where Captain Jedediah Chapman is killed. You could try to find that when you're driving through the wheat field. But I'll share one account here. This is another New York Tribune article from July 10th, 1863. This is by an unidentified soldier of the 27th Connecticut. And he writes, "I have very heavy news to communicate. William Wilson is dead, and George Swank is severely wounded. We were engaged on Thursday, July 2nd. Our fight took place through a wheat field, then through a grass field, on through some underbrush, over a little brook, and up a steep wooded hill, covered with large rocks. We drove the enemy in splendid style about half a mile till we gained the summit of this hill, and would have gone further, but the brigades on the right and left of us were not so successful as we were, and the consequence was that we were attacked on both flanks and compelled to fall back. I saw Wilson on the very top of the hill in the best of spirits, fighting like a veteran. Yesterday, July 4th, I found his body almost on the same spot, shot through the head, the ball entering over the right temple. He is buried where he fell. He did not change much, but looked about the same as ever. I have got little mementos belonging to Wilson, but the rebels had picked his pockets before I got to the body, and had taken off his pants, shoes, and stockings." Sad affair there in the 27th Connecticut. And a reminder, too, at the end of each section, I have a list of the killed and mortally wounded of that particular regiment. And in this particular case, the 27th Connecticut lost 2 officers, 2 NCOs, and 9 privates. And it's a shorter list, and so I'm going to name these names here for the 27th Connecticut. Private William Bodwell, First Lieutenant Jedediah Chapman, Private Michael Confrey, Corporal Charles Cornwall, Private Patrick Dunn, Private Edward Farr, Private John Goodwin, Private Marcus Judson, Lieutenant Colonel Henry Merwin, Private William Scott, Private Joseph Stevens, Corporal William Wilson, and Private Thomas Yale. It's a small death toll, but that was a lot for one tiny regiment at Gettysburg. So, moving on now. I'm moving on to Volume 4, the Third Army Corps. So here we come to Sickles now. The central figure there being General Dan Sickles. Flanked around him are General William French, General J.H. Hobart Ward, General David Birney, and General Andrew Humphreys. So typically there, to give you an idea, most corps had 3 divisions, and so I featured the division commanders. And because I had space for an extra, I would pick a prominent brigade commander of that corps. And sometimes I would just bias. It was somebody I just really wanted to put on the cover. But you might ask yourself, well, why is General French here? So the Third Corps actually had 2 divisions at Gettysburg. Their extra division would be formed right after the Battle of Gettysburg, and that would be put in command of General French, who also assisted in command of the Corps after Sickles' absence as well. So French had been commanding the garrisons at Harper's Ferry, and most of those troops would be added to the Third Corps after the Battle of Gettysburg. So that's why I feature him. I have on the bottom there the painting from Edwin Forbes showing the Third Corps at Gettysburg, and you can see in the foreground Sickles and his staff riding towards the lines, probably not long before the wounding moment of Dan Sickles. And then on the back, I have some of those famous images of the dead at Gettysburg. And again, that's colorized by my friend Luke Young. Reading the description here off the back, Volume 4, the Third Army Corps, offers an in-depth look at Major General Dan Sickles and his regiment on the fateful afternoon of July 2nd. Sickles may be one of the most controversial figures of the American Civil War. However, all opinions aside, the regiments and men of the Third Corps fought as valiantly as they could against overwhelming odds, especially at the Peach Orchard and Devil's Den. This volume also features General French and his command from Harper's Ferry, assigned to the battered Third Corps shortly after the battle. So the reason why this volume is just as big as the others, even though it's a smaller corps, I have that extra division added here. So again, I have those reserve units included here, and many compelling accounts from those guys on the way to Gettysburg. For the Third Corps, I decided to pick one regiment here. This is actually, I think this is a pretty known account, but I wanted to highlight the 57th Pennsylvania Infantry. So again, here you have them shown here, their profile, their title, monument, and a picture of a member of that regiment there. And so I'll give you the stats first. The 57th Pennsylvania was mustered in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania between October and November 1861. They were mustered out on June 29, 1865. They were commanded by Colonel Peter Sides, who was wounded in action. The command at the end of the battle was Captain Alanson H. Nelson. They were armed with Austrian 54 caliber rifles. Their strength was 207 men. Their casualties were 115. They had 11 killed, 46 wounded, and 58 captured or missing. The percentage loss was 55.6, and their monument was dedicated in 1888. Their commanding officer at the end of the battle, Captain Alanson Nelson, he actually has a compelling account. He wrote a memoir called The Battles of Chancellorsville and Gettysburg, published in 1899. But he wrote of the ordeal of the collapse of the lines and having to escape. His men were in the Sherfy house. He and a few men were holding out in there until they had to get out of there. And so here's his account of the Battle of Gettysburg. When the brigade was forming to the right of the Peach Orchard, an order came to the regiment to detail 15 picked men and send them to the front as skirmishers. Colonel Sykes ordered me to fill the detail, which I did, and place the detail in charge of Lieutenant Crossley, who immediately deployed the men and moved forward to a clump of buildings to the right of the Peach Orchard, and among the buildings was a brick house. The buildings were standing on the west side of the Emmitsburg Road. Soon the whole brigade moved forward, and my regiment halted in the rear of the buildings, where they were soon engaged with the enemy, same as the rest of Birney's division. When the enemy broke through on our left near Little Round Top, regiment after regiment was doubled back from the left and passed in rear of us and to the right on the Emmitsburg Road. Nearly all the regiments on our left had passed us. When I became anxious about the detail I had sent forward, and the last I saw of them, they were taking shelter under a hot fire from the enemy in the brick house and outbuildings. I walked up to the colonel and, pointing to the retreating regiment, said, "It looks as though we will soon have to move out of here or be captured." He turned his head to the left, and seeing the regiments near us on the left going to the rear, said, "Yes, I think we will go now." I remonstrated with him, saying that many of the regiment had taken shelter in the buildings and that we ought to make a detail who would rush around to the several buildings and warn the officers and men in the detail I had sent out as skirmishers that we were going to fall back. But he insisted on taking the regiment out then, replying that I could stay and get as many out as I could. I turned the company over to the second lieutenant and started on the run from one building to the other. The roar of artillery and bursting of shells and musketry was such that it was necessary to take hold of and shake a man to get his attention. This made slow work for one man to get over the ground. When I had made the rounds of the outbuildings and got the men started to the rear, I then went to the main building, and looking down to the left and seeing that no advance was being made on our west front, thought the enemy was far enough away so I could make a run through the house, upstairs and down, and get a good many men out before the enemy could reach me. The entrance to the house was from the north into a hall that led upstairs. I ran up the stairs and from one room to the other, and started them to the rear as fast as I could get them to understand what I wanted of them. I then started downstairs to notify those in the lower part of the house. When I reached the hall, I thought I would look down to the left, where the enemy first broke through our lines, to see how far they had progressed in my direction. I had always said I would never be taken prisoner as long as I could fight or run. There was nothing I dreaded so much as to be taken prisoner. But when I looked out in there, horror of horrors, the enemy was in the yard in large force, not 50 feet away. They saw me as soon as I did them and ordered me to surrender. I saw at a glance that they were in a bunch, and but few of them could shoot without endangering themselves. So I thought I could run, quartering past them, and possibly escape. I took the chance and made the dive past them. Then firing began. Either their aim was poor, or else I outran their shots, for they never touched me. As each shot would whiz past me, it increased my efforts. There was some kind of a yard fence around the buildings. How high, I do not know. What I do know is that I did not touch it, nor did I ever make better time on a railroad car than I did until I got out of range of these gentlemen, who were so anxious to introduce me to their Southern friends. Wow, you can really feel the intensity there in the moment of trying to escape capture in the chaos of the collapse of the Third Army Corps at Gettysburg. Again, a lot of people, you know, uh, Sickles being a controversial figure and everything, like a lot of people just, and this happens with the 11th Corps too, but we tend to ignore and just skip over like, oh, Sickles is an idiot and all this stuff. But you forget that he had 10,000 men under his command, and they have stories to tell. Each of these regiments has a story to tell. And, just like the 11th Corps, people think like it's just a bunch of buffoons that run away when the firing starts. That's not the case when you read the count by count basis of these units. You had many, many, many valiant efforts happening all along the lines of Gettysburg by these guys. And so while their commanders may get the controversy, the individual men and regiments of these corps deserve all the respect in the world there. Moving on now, Volume 5 is fitting. Volume 5 is the 5th Corps. And we have here on the cover here, we have General George Sykes commanding that corps. Next to him, General Stephen Weed, General Samuel Crawford, and on the other side, Colonel Strong Vincent, and General Romaine Ayres. And on the bottom there is a painting by Edwin Forbes with 5th Corps artillery on top of Little Round Top. And on the back cover here, this is very interesting. This is an Ohio battery that was attached to the 5th Corps that was positioned on Little Round Top. And this image is from a mural in Portsmouth, Ohio. I would never have known about this. One of my sisters lived in Portsmouth for a while, and they had these beautiful murals in the town. I remember stumbling upon this on one of our visits. Is like, oh wow, it's a Gettysburg mural in Portsmouth, Ohio, and it was honoring that battery that served at Gettysburg. I could tell you the exact battery here. Let's see. I know it's an Ohio battery. Battery L, the 1st Ohio. That's the unit that was formed. They were raised over in Portsmouth, Ohio. So you can read about them in this book. I'll read the description here. Volume 5, the 5th Army Corps, offers an in-depth look at Major General George Sykes and his regiments at the Battle of Gettysburg. The famous 5th Corps was full of battle-tested veterans with the United States Regular Infantry and the Pennsylvania Reserves, as well as many regiments eager to prove themselves in action, such as Vincent's and Weed's brigades. While they are primarily known as the saviors of Little Round Top, The Fifth Corps was also heavily involved in the fighting at the wheat field and some of the only Union offenses on July 3rd and July 4th. Yeah, read into that sometimes. July 4th. I want to highlight one unit from here, and I figured I would showcase the 12th U.S. Regular Infantry. Once I find my page number here, that's page 112. So this is showcasing the 12th U.S. I have their monument and their commander pictured here. They were organized May 4th, 1861, and at the end of the war, they found themselves in New York in July 1865. They were commanded by Captain Thomas Dunn. They were armed with 58 caliber muskets. They had 415 men at Gettysburg, 92 casualties. They had 8 killed, 71 wounded, 13 captured and missing, with a percentage loss of 22.1. So here we have a few accounts. I want to share, this is about one of the slain heroes of the 12th U.S. Among the slain heroes at Gettysburg was Lieutenant S.A. Miller, son of Silas Miller, at Piermont, and long and favorably known to the people of our county. About 18 months ago, he enlisted as a private in the 12th Infantry, USA, and conducted himself with such coolness and bravery in the different actions in which he participated, that on the 19th of last April, he received a lieutenant's commission in the same regiment. At South Mountain, he was taken prisoner and carried to Richmond, where after an imprisonment of 6 weeks, he was paroled and exchanged. He was in the Battle of Fredericksburg and at Chancellorsville, and closed his career as a soldier at Gettysburg, where he was shot in the region of the heart about 6 o'clock p.m. on the 2nd of July. His body was recovered and given a decent burial. We have seen letters from young Miller's brother officers which speak of his bravery and noble qualities in the highest terms. The war has claimed no nobler victim, nor brought a more shining mark than this gallant soldier of freedom. His memory will be forever embalmed in a grateful remembrance of the nation for which he died. The U.S. regulars get overlooked at Gettysburg too, and they suffered severely at Gettysburg, especially when they were retreating from the wheat field down below Hawks Ridge towards the slopes of the Round Top, and they got fired in the back. The Confederates stormed through the wheat field. Their officer corps was decimated practically at Gettysburg, and so again, everybody is worth reading into, and I think sometimes we can skip over them. When it comes to so many, again, when you think Fifth Corps, a lot of people immediately think the 20th Maine and whatnot, and that's fine. I was a big, enthusiast, and I'm still attracted to the 20th Maine. But when you find that there's so many other regiments in that same corps that sacrificed or performed brave deeds, and the human sacrifice that happened, whether a regiment lost 7 men killed or 500 men killed, those are all human beings. Those are all people. Someone is crying at home about that loss. Someone is being affected by that. And so that's why all these stories are worth sharing and telling. That brings us now to the 6th Army Corps. And here we have, again, this is Volume 6, 6th Army Corps. The colorized central figure here is General John Sedgwick, commanding the Corps. Next to him I have General Alexander Shaler, General Horatio Wright, General Albion Howe, and General Frank Wheaton there on all sides there. On the bottom, I have another Edwin Forbes painting of the march after Gettysburg, the pouring rains, drenching rains of the pursuit of Lee's army there after Gettysburg. And I feature that one because the 6th Corps did its share of marching, and so I wanted to feature men marching on the back there. Also in the back, I have the rear of the Union lines at Gettysburg, another Edwin Forbes painting showing troops marching on the way to Gettysburg, another fitting tribute to the 6th Corps. I'll now read a description from the back. Volume 6, the 6th Army Corps offers an in-depth look at Major General John Sedgwick and the soldiers of the Greek Cross. While only slightly engaged in the actual battle, the veteran regiments of the 6th Corps would make one of the most incredible marches on American soil, covering over 35 miles in one day. The Corps' actions are mostly forgotten, but are deserving of equal respect of the other units in the Army, as they still suffer the hardships of the rigorous campaign, as well as serving as a reliable reserve at all crucial points of the battlefield. Really one of those stories to kind of give you an idea of the sacrifices of the march to Gettysburg. And so I'm going to highlight, let's see, towards the back here. Let's see. I remember the account. I'm trying to find the exact account. Here we go. This is a fascinating one, and this is just gives you an idea of the issues with shoes that the Union Army had as well on the march to Gettysburg. So I'm highlighting for this one the 139th Pennsylvania Infantry. I have their profile here, their monument and commander shown. And here's their stats. They were mustered in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania on September 1st, 1862. They were mustered out on June 21st, 1865. They were commanded by Colonel Frederick Hill Collier, who was wounded. The command at the end of the battle was Lieutenant Colonel William H. Moody. They were armed with 69 caliber rifles. Their strength was 443 men. They had 20 casualties, with 1 killed, 19 wounded, and 0 captured or missing, for a percentage loss of 4.5. Their monuments were dedicated in 1886 and 1889. But I wanted to share one account. This is by Captain William Herbert of the 139th Pennsylvania, and this is from the book Pennsylvania Gettysburg Ceremonies at the Dedication of the Monuments, that series from the early 1900s there. I see the faces of Company I's boys before me, who, after their shoes were worn out, tied up their feet in cloths to protect them from the hot sand, and tramped cheerfully on. Some of you will remember Big Joe Walker of Company C. Corporal Walker had been most liberally endowed by nature in a physical way, and had equally large understandings. Joe and his chum, Sam Grinder, had made requisition upon the quartermaster, each for a pair of number 12s. But as every case of shoes did not have usually more than 1 pair of that size, the quartermaster was not able to honor their order just at that time. Joe's shoes had given out. One day he was stepping out in as soldierly way as possible with bare feet. One of his comrades called out, "Hello, Joe, how are you getting along with those feet? That is pretty hard luck." The old veteran replied promptly, "I am all right. If the Johnny Rebs are going to Pennsylvania, they will find me there too if I have to wear these feet up to the stumps." Joe got there and did his duty too. Poor fellow, he afterwards left one of his legs down in that same country. Again, that's an account by Captain William Herbert. But that just shows you the sacrifices these guys were making on these forced marches to Gettysburg, and how, people always think of barefoot Confederates, but you had many soldiers who were barefoot or wearing poor shoes, and they're marching faster than the supply lines can keep up with them. So that's another thing worthy of note. Moving on now, we're getting closer to the end of this series, but I have Volume 7 now, and Volume 7 is the 11th Army Corps. And you see here the central figure being General Oliver Howard. Next to him is General Carl Schurz, General Francis Barlow, General Alexander Schimmelpfennig, and General Adolf von Steinwehr, all of the 11th Corps. And on the bottom here, I have an image of elements of the 11th Corps and artillery units defending Cemetery Hill, and another Edwin Forbes painting. And on the back here, I have a famous image of the cemetery gatehouse, and that was colorized by my friend Luke as well. And you can see in the foreground there, he even colorized the two sons, believed to be the sons of oh my gosh, I can't believe her name escapes me. Elizabeth Thorne, her two sons there, who, by the way, her story I included in here because her story is very fascinating. Plus, she's honored by a monument at Gettysburg. One of the only female heroes of Gettysburg that has a monument recognized there. So if you go to Evergreen Cemetery, look just beyond the gatehouse for that monument of Elizabeth Thorne and look into her story. It's incredible what she was able to do while pregnant during the Battle of Gettysburg. I wanted to highlight an Ohio unit in the 11th Corps. I'm going to go to the 55th Ohio. I'm on page 130 here. And let's see what account I want to share. Okay, here we go. This is an account fighting the sharpshooters in the town of Gettysburg, which, a lot of people don't realize. We know the 11th Corps got butchered on the first day, but they were under fire all 3 days, because they're there hunkering down on the cemetery hill. Some of them are hiding out on the houses on the edge of the hill. They're fighting house to house, trying to clear out sharpshooters. So they were occupied in harm's way, through most of the battle. This is an account from Trials and Triumphs, the record of the 55th Ohio Volunteer Infantry by Hartwell Osborne, published in 1904. On July 3rd, 1863, at the Battle of Gettysburg, rebel sharpshooters from the houses and barns in the outskirts of the village caused great annoyance and loss of life to the Union troops by picking off the men as they moved about in the rear of the firing line. General Howard called for volunteers to drive the sharpshooters out from their hiding places and to capture them if possible. 5 members of the 55th responded. Upon a given signal, this force was directed to charge and drive away or capture the enemy. The signal was given, but for some reason the line failed to respond except one man, Benjamin Peace of Company E. He, supposing the rest were with him, charged up to a brick barn from which the fire had been especially annoying, and pounding on the closed doors with the butt of his musket, called loudly on the inmates to surrender. One by one, the rebel soldiers on the inside dropped their guns and crept forth till 5 had given themselves up. They were chagrined to find their captor had no support, but it was too late, and they were sullenly preceded him to the Union lines, which cheered the valiant soldier again and again. So there you have a heroic moment from an individual in the 55th Ohio. So I'm biased. This volume is my personal favorite for the series. I'm a huge fan of the 11th Army Corps. And so I tried to find some of my favorite best accounts to include here in that volume. And so if that one turned out more epic than the rest of them, you know why. But they deserve a lot of recognition and attention. All right. Moving on now to volume 8, which is the 12th Army Corps. And you see the full cover there. And then the 4 center figure here, we have General Henry Slocum. And beside him is General John Geary, General Alpheus Williams. On the other side, General George Greene and General Thomas Ruger. Now, on the bottom there, yet another Edwin Forbes painting showing 12th Corps soldiers defending Culp's Hill. And on the back is almost a reverse image from the front, is showing the Confederates attacking Culp's Hill. And that's another Edwin Forbes painting. Volume 8, the 12th Army Corps, offers an in-depth look at Major General Henry Slocum and the smallest Union Corps at Gettysburg. Consisting of many battle-tested troops, the 12th Corps would gain fame as the heroes and defenders of Culp's Hill. Of all the Union Corps in the battle, the 12th may have had the most success against their opponents, fighting mostly behind breastworks and fending off every enemy offensive on the crucial right flank of the Army of the Potomac. On each day of the battle, units of the Corps were called upon to assist at vulnerable points in the battle lines. So there you have a summary description for this volume. I want to do something different here, and I wanted to showcase a headquarters guard unit for the 12th Corps. So the Provost Guard unit was the 10th Maine Infantry, and they actually have a monument on the Baltimore Pike below Culp's Hill, so you can find that. It has the big 12th Corps star in that monument. But I wanted to, give you an idea here of life for one of those units, that didn't necessarily was fully engaged, but they were there in Gettysburg. And so here's the facts on the 10th Maine. They were mustered in Portland, Maine on October 4th, 1861. They were consolidated with the 29th Maine on November 1st, 1863. At Gettysburg, they were commanded by Captain John D. Beardsley. They had 169 men and 0 casualties. Their monument was dedicated in 1889. And I wanted to share an account by John Gould of the 10th Maine, and he wrote this account in Maine, the Maine at Gettysburg book, published in 1898. A large number of men were at once detailed for guard duty around Corps headquarters, also as wagoners or mechanics under the Corps quartermaster, and for clerks or orderlies of the various staff officers. A cattle guard of 16 men were detailed from the battalion a short time before starting on to Gettysburg. They had the care of about 200 beeves, and when upon the march, they followed the hospital supply train, which moves immediately behind the troops. A detail into this guard would ordinarily be considered desirable by a soldier in search of adventure and a free and easy life. Their part at Gettysburg was to march to the front, as usual, with the Corps on July 1st. Then, when it was discovered that they were too near the enemy, they were sent back to Westminster, Maryland, marching all night of the 1st and part of the 2nd day, and once more going to the front during the night of July 3rd through the 4th, and then moving with the army in pursuit of Lee. There was plenty of free and easy adventure, but only a little sleep in all of this. The pitching and striking of the headquarters tent was also done by the battalion, Sergeant Maurice Hayes being especially charged with this duty. He had 12 men under him, and they were also expected to put the headquarters grounds in the best and neatest possible condition. On arriving at the field, General Holcomb's headquarters were established on Powers Hill, but the main body of the battalion was at once put to the task of arresting the stream of stragglers and skulks, which is always flowing out in rear of the fighting line. Here let it be stated that there was less skulking at Gettysburg than at any other of the great battles of the Army of the Potomac. A number of women and children who had left their homes when the 1st and 11th Corps fell back were put under the care of the battalion and sent farther to the rear. On the second day, Corporals Coy of D and Jones of B, with 6 men each, were sent to guard springs near the center of the field that the water might be used exclusively for the wounded. When the attack was made on Sickles, they were relieved. A party of Confederate prisoners was turned over to the battalion during the evening of the first day, and a detail of 30 men under Lieutenant Libby was made to escort them to the rear. Stillman Emerson describes this as an all-night march, with an immediate return to the front again on the 2nd, where they all arrived on the early morning of July 3rd, never so tired, hungry, cross, and sleepy. Lieutenant Libby's remembrance of this event is that there were 27 prisoners, and that they were sent 18 miles to the rear, and there turned over the troops belonging to General Patrick, Provost Marshal General of the Army. So that gives you just a little glimpse idea of the duties of a headquarters unit at Gettysburg. So even though they're not engaged in battle per se, they're involved because they're watching, making sure to prevent desertion. They're escorting prisoners to the rear. So that gives you an idea of a lot of what those headquarters type units would be assigned to in those provost units. So I want to kind of give you an example of that. This leads us now to the final volume of my series, Volume 9, which is the Cavalry Corps at Gettysburg. And the central figure there is a commanding officer, General Alfred Pleasanton. Beside him is General John Buford, General Judson Kilpatrick, General George Custer, and General David Gregg. On the bottom there is a famous sketch of Union Cavalry at Falling Waters, a part of the Michigan Brigade, assaulting the Confederate lines there. And on the back, I have the famous image of Buford and his staff. The only one I always remember is Miles Keogh there. And I think in the middle there, that's actually, I think it's Craig Wadsworth, the son of James Wadsworth, who was division commander in the 1st Army Corps. I'll read the description off the back here. Volume 9, the Cavalry Corps, offers an in-depth look at Major General Alfred Pleasanton and the mounted forces of the Army of the Potomac, from Buford's delay in action on July 1st to the epic cavalry clashes on East Cavalry Field and Farnsworth Charge on July 3rd. The Union Cavalry performed at important points or crucial junctures throughout the Battle of Gettysburg. In the saddle for 4 days and weeks on end, the Union Cavalry were engaged on nearly every day of the campaign against their rebel counterparts, weather and fatigue. So these guys, even though they didn't fight a lot at Gettysburg, they're fighting the heat and they're fighting all those long treks around Pennsylvania, trying to keep up with everything. And they were some of the first elements, of course, pursuing Lee's retreating army. In this case, I wanted to showcase one of the Michigan units here of Custer's brigade. Let's see, particularly the 7th Michigan Cavalry. This is an account. Well, first, as usual, I'll begin with showing you the profile of this unit. The picture there, the monument, and officer of the unit. They were mustered in Grand Rapids, Michigan on January 16th, 1863. They were mustered out December 16th, 1865. They were commanded by Colonel William Mann. They were armed with Burnside carbines and Colt 44s. Their strength was 383 men. They had 100 casualties, with 13 killed, 48 wounded, 39 captured and missing, with a percentage loss of 26.1. And their monument was dedicated in 1889, which their monument is part of the Michigan Brigade Monument, which was dedicated in 1889. The account I want to share with you is Major G.W. Newcomb of the 7th Michigan Cavalry, and this is from the book Operations of Our Cavalry, the Michigan Cavalry Brigade, published, this has been in the New York Times, August 6, 1863. At Gettysburg on the 3rd of July, on the extended right of our line during an early part of the day, the regiment as reserve and as a support, the battery occupied various positions on the field. At about 4 o'clock p.m., the regiment was ordered to charge the advancing line of the enemy skirmishers, who were closely supported by their cavalry reserve. A desperate but unequal hand-to-hand conflict here occurred. The regiment, being finally obliged to retire twice, rallied under a sharp fire from the enemy, without support or cover, and returned to the charge, and held the field until the advance of the 1st Michigan. At Monterey on the night of the 4th of July, 2 companies under command of Captain Armstrong were detached to hold the mountain road on the right. The remainder of the regiment fought on the right as dismounted skirmishers. At Falling Waters, July 14th, on coming into action, Major Granger was dispatched to the right, where from the enemy a 10-pound Parrott gun, which, after having been turned against the enemy with great effect, he brought from the field. Another portion of the regiment went to the support of the skirmishers, and a remainder as a support to battery. The enemy's column advancing to charge this battery, that portion of the right supporting it, 70 sabres, advanced to the charge and brought from the field 400 prisoners with the battle flag of the 55th Virginia. The dismounted skirmishers of this regiment captured the colonel of the 55th Virginia with several other officers and a squad of men. So that shows you a little bit of the valiant efforts of the cavalry there at the close of the Gettysburg campaign. Well, so that was a summary of all 9 volumes of my Gettysburg Order of Battle series for the Army of the Potomac. Again, my hope is to one day do the same thing for the Army of Northern Virginia. To give you a little preview idea of what I hope to accomplish with that is it would be a 4-volume set. Volume 1 would be the headquarters of the Army of Northern Virginia, along with Jeb Stuart's Cavalry Division. So that would be Volume 1. Volume 2 would be Longstreet's Corps. Volume 3 would be Ewell's Corps. And Volume 4 would be A.P. Hill's Corps. So that would be how it would be structured. So look forward to, in the future, a 4-volume set on the Army of Northern Virginia. I personally also, I'm in South, and so one of the biggest battlefields in close proximity here is Chickamauga, Georgia. And I would love to do something like this for the armies at Chickamauga, the Army of the Cumberland, and the Army of Tennessee on the CS side. Maybe that can happen one day too. These are huge projects, and again, I don't want to simplify it. Like I want it to be detailed because I appreciate the details. And so, but making it with details takes time. And so, this project, this 9-volume series, took 3 years fully for me to finish. And so it took a lot out of me. And so I'm working slowly but surely on a A&V counterpart. But with that being said, I hope you enjoy this series. I hope maybe this episode is a good explainer on the series. And if you're curious or interested in purchasing them, listen to this episode and you can get an understanding of the content to expect in each of these books. I'm going to link to all these books in the description of the episode. You can go to lulu.com. I also have a link tree, which I'll share with all the links to all these various books. And so I encourage you to look more into that if you're interested. And also, if you like this episode and want to hear more episodes of my podcast, be sure to go back and watch. You can watch episodes on YouTube. You can listen on Spotify, listen on Apple. And so they're accessible in many different places. And I'm really excited. I had a lot of fun interviews this year. I interviewed artists. I interviewed regimental historians. I interviewed reenactors. So a lot of fascinating interviews this season, and I look forward to sharing more later this year. And I look forward to more book projects too. But with all that being said, again, I wish you all a happy 4th, a happy summer, and stay tuned for more content. Until then, see you, everybody.